The air in the ready room hung thick and metallic, smelling of stale coffee, synthetic carpet, and the heavy, oiled scent of recently cleaned rifles, but the tension was what truly choked the atmosphere. Operation Red Sands was not a training exercise. It was a hot patch deployment to stabilize a rapidly collapsing region, and the stakes were measurable in global security, which only amplified the snickers and casual dismissal as the briefing team scrolled past the call sign of one of their mission-critical communications specialists. Corporal Elara Vance sat at the far end of the table, her posture rigid and eyes locked on the schematic of the target building, a picture of absolute focus that nonetheless did nothing to deflect the low-humming disdain radiating from the Special Operations Liaison team they were embedded with, a squad of veteran Marines who carried their expertise like a physical shield against anything they deemed unserious or unproven, and nothing seemed more unserious to them than the 4 syllables that designated her on the net. Cupcake. Captain Hayes, the team leader, a man whose call sign Rockslide was earned through years of frontline demolitions and who seemed to communicate primarily through condescending glares, didn't even bother to lower his voice when he muttered to his close protection Sergeant Miller, "Cupcake, huh? Guess we know who's on snack duty when the shooting starts," a comment which drew a predictable low chuckle from the others, the kind of dismissive noise that was less about humor and more about reinforcing the hierarchy, the belief that a woman, especially one assigned to comms and cyber, was inherently softer, less essential than the triggers and kinetic energy they represented. The deployment brief detailed a high-risk extraction deep inside hostile territory, a mission requiring absolute silence until the critical moment, followed by a coordinated rapid retreat under maximum suppression, demanding flawless coordination across multiple frequencies, a complexity that should have commanded professional respect for the comms expert, yet the name Cupcake seemed to short-circuit that requirement entirely, reducing Vance to a punchline piece of decorative equipment. Sergeant Miller, checking the loadout of his sidearm, leaned back and sighed audibly, loud enough for Vance to hear over the drone of the projector, and stated, "Look, Capt, just make sure Cupcake can manage the frequency hop when we go loud. I don't want my mic cutting out when I'm taking heat, because someone's too busy setting up the Wi-Fi," a sentiment that was clearly designed to wound. But Vance, without so much as a flicker of annoyance, simply ran a digital check on her encrypted tablet, confirmed the protocols, and replied, her voice low and completely even, "Sergeant, the frequency hop is automated and runs on an independent failsafe. You won't lose comms, but if you're concerned about your microphone, perhaps test the noise gate on your boom mic now," a response so technical and so devoid of emotional reaction that it only seemed to irritate Miller further, but the clock was ticking down to H-hour. There was no time for further banter, professional or otherwise, as the team finalized their packs, strapped on their helmets, and moved out towards the waiting Osprey V-22s, the rotors already chopping the dry desert air into a furious vortex, a loud, overwhelming sound that mercifully drowned out the last lingering, petty joke about the call sign. But the contempt, the deep-seated dismissal of Corporal Vance of Cupcake was still very much present, a silent, invisible weight they all carried into the chaos. The insertion was textbook, a low-altitude, high-speed approach that dropped them onto the dusty rooftop of a dilapidated factory complex, the target compound barely 300 meters away, across a maze of narrow alleyways and abandoned vehicles, and for the first 10 minutes, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of boots on gravel and the rasp of breathing through helmet microphones, as Elara, moving silently with the patrol, performed her essential, almost invisible task, confirming crypto handshake, verifying the sensor grid's satellite connection, and monitoring the ambient radio chatter for any unusual spikes, the kind of subtle signature that would indicate a hostile force was already aware of their presence. The tension was a palpable thing, a heavy pressure in the chest that tightened with every silent footfall, and then when Epos went 15 minutes, just as Captain Hayes was positioning the breaching team at the rear entrance of the compound, the air itself seemed to turn toxic, the secure communication lines on their encrypted net suddenly dissolving into a screeching, high-pitched static that instantly blinded the entire team, making their sophisticated digital radios nothing more than expensive paperweights, a terrifying and immediate isolation that severed their connection not only to command, but also to the intelligence stream guiding their steps. Hayes slammed his fist against the receiver on his vest, yelling Rockslide to command, "Check comms, we're jammed. Repeat, we are jammed." But his voice was swallowed entirely by the electronic screech, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow that they were completely exposed, cut off, operating on stale intelligence with no way to report their position or receive updates, turning a precision strike into a desperate, blind scramble for survival deep inside hostile territory. Miller, pulling security around the corner, his rifle trained on the dark alley, spun around and demanded of Vance, his voice laced with sudden sharp panic, "Cupcake, what the hell is going on? Kill the static, now." But Elara was already working, her fingers flying across the auxiliary keyboard of her console, bypassing the primary jammer protocol which had been specifically designed to counter common field jammers, only to realize within seconds that this was no common jammer. It was a sophisticated directional denial of service attack, perfectly timed and executed, clearly aimed at isolating this specific small unit, a terrifying confirmation that the enemy knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. Hayes, his face grim and tight with fear, was already considering aborting the mission, calculating the odds of getting his team out under heavy fire with zero external support, when Elara, completely calm amid the chaos, looked up from her console and simply stated, "Captain, the primary net is compromised. They're running a tailored signal. I'm attempting to patch into the secondary encrypted relay now, but the decryption key will take approximately 90 seconds to process," a statement that offered a sliver of hope, but the sheer agonizing length of 90 seconds in a firefight, when the first muzzle flashes could erupt at any second, felt like a lifetime. The 90 seconds that followed felt like an eternity compressed into a ticking digital clock, with the Marines spread out, hunkering down and scanning every shadow for movement, their hearts hammering against their ribs, waiting for either the crackle of a re-established comms line or the sudden eruption of gunfire. But just as Hayes was about to give the order to fall back, accepting the mission failure in favor of saving his men, a soft, crystalline, perfectly unperturbed voice cut through the background static on his auxiliary channel, a frequency he wasn't even aware his unit possessed. Slicing through the noise like a surgical blade, the voice was calm, female, and layered with multiple encryption passes that made its signal utterly impervious to the jamming that had crippled their primary systems, and the call sign was not one he recognized from any NATO or Allied force roster. "Ghost leader to Rockslide, do you copy?" The unexpected clarity of the signal was jarring, but Captain Hayes didn't hesitate, gripping his microphone tightly and whispering back, "Rockslide copies, Ghost leader. Identify your source and authorization," demanding answers but simultaneously recognizing that this was the highest level of emergency bypass communication he had ever encountered, and the response was chillingly precise, devoid of any small talk or explanation, immediately cutting to the critical tactical data that his team desperately needed. "Rockslide, be advised, you have 4 hostile units moving to your north, 2 more flanking to your west, approaching your extraction point via the main conduit in 60 seconds. Their jammer is located 800 meters northeast, shielded by an active counter-mortar system, rendering conventional support useless," the voice articulated, dumping a fire hose of perfectly relevant real-time intelligence into their ears, information that was so specific, so now that it could only have been generated by a satellite or aerial asset, with active direct visual confirmation, meaning this ghost leader was operating at a level far above what Hayes's team could even fathom, instantly neutralizing the tactical advantage the enemy had gained with their jamming. Elara Vance, still hunched over her auxiliary console, her brow furrowed in concentration, subtly shifted her headset from the primary channel, which remained a useless cacophony of white noise, to the secure secondary Ghost Leader channel, her fingers continuing their blur of motion, not responding to the call sign, but clearly monitoring its data stream, processing the intelligence faster than the unit could absorb it, and Sergeant Miller, listening to the data cascade into his ear, precise grids, unit counts, movement vectors, suddenly felt a wave of cold realization wash over him. They had been seconds away from walking into a textbook kill zone, and this unknown entity, Ghost Leader, pulled them back from the brink, using a system that was clearly reserved for the absolute highest echelon of operational authority, making the entire squad suddenly and entirely dependent on a voice that appeared from nowhere, speaking truths they couldn't verify but dared not ignore. The necessity of immediate action overshadowed any questions about who Ghost Leader was or why they were suddenly running the show. The enemy was closing in fast, forcing Captain Hayes to make a split-second decision, a desperate gamble to follow the unknown voice's real-time instructions, and he immediately ordered his squad to pivot, abandoning the planned rear entrance, and instead moving covertly through a dilapidated underground drainage system Ghost Leader had immediately highlighted as a safer, albeit more nauseating, path to the target. Hayes, while leading his team through the dark, waterlogged tunnels, kept his microphone pressed close to his lips, occasionally asking for clarification or updates, and Ghost Leader's response was always instantaneous, calm and flawless, directing their movements with the smooth, detached confidence of a chess master moving pieces across a board, providing details on structural weaknesses, blind corners, and even the precise moment a patrolling guard would look away, allowing them to slip past unnoticed, all while their primary comms expert, Corporal Vance, quietly trailed behind, her head constantly cocked, her posture tense, monitoring the Ghost Leader channel with an intensity Hayes was only now beginning to recognize. Desperate to understand the source of their salvation, Hayes finally pulled aside Sergeant Miller during a brief pause to whisper, "Miller, get Major Rourke on the emergency satellite phone now. I need to know who Ghost Leader is. This isn't our op anymore. I need authorization," and Miller immediately complied, patching a heavily encrypted, barely functional satellite burst through the jamming to Central Command's liaison officer, the wait for the reply stretching the nerves of both men to the breaking point. When Major Rourke's voice finally crackled back, strained, distant, and annoyed, Hayes immediately laid out the situation, the jamming, the mission compromise, and the sudden unauthorized intervention of the omniscient Ghost Leader, who was now dictating their movements, demanding to know the unit's identity and if they were to comply with their command. The Major's voice, however, lost all its professional irritation, replaced instead with a tone of sudden icy seriousness that sent a chill down Hayes' spine as he finally replied, "Rockslide, listen to me closely. Ghost Leader is running this op. You are now subordinate to their direction, effective immediately, and Captain, for the love of God, stop arguing and listen to your liaison," followed by a long heavy pause on the line that felt pregnant with unspoken information. Hayes waited, dumbfounded, certain he had misunderstood, before Rourke added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "Rockslide, your direct comms and intelligence link to Ghost Leader is Corporal Vance. That's who they assigned to your unit. Cupcake is Ghost Leader. Do you copy that, Captain?" "You are reporting to Cupcake now." Captain Hayes stood frozen in the sewage-scented tunnel, the reality of the words slamming into him. The call sign he had mocked, the operative he had dismissed as a coffee runner, was not only running a Tier 1 operation from outside the wire, but was now officially his commander, holding the key to their mission and their lives. The cognitive dissonance of that single shocking command, "Cupcake is Ghost Leader," forced Captain Hayes into an instant critical digression, a mental rewind through the facts he thought he knew about Corporal Elara Vance, juxtaposed against the impossible reality of her current operational authority. The standard military paperwork had listed her as a comms technician, E4, assigned for auxiliary support, a profile that suggested competence, but not the kind of genius required to run a real-time counterintelligence operation. But Hayes suddenly realized that this mundane profile was the lie, the perfectly crafted cover story, a digital smokescreen designed to keep the true nature of her assignment invisible, even to the unit she was attached to. The truth, revealed through a frantic, delayed information burst from Major Rourke that finally confirmed the extent of Vance's unique skill set, painted a dramatically different picture. Elara Vance was not just a corporal, she was a certified cognitive warfare specialist, recruited straight out of MIT's computational intelligence program, having been quietly inducted into Task Force Spectre, a classified multi-branch unit dedicated to predictive tactical planning and autonomous warfare systems, bypassing the conventional promotion structure entirely. Her call sign, Cupcake, was not an accident or a cruel joke, but a calculated operational cover, an intentional attempt to elicit the kind of superficial dismissal that would ensure she was consistently underestimated and overlooked by both allies and enemies in the field, allowing her to operate a secondary, fully autonomous intelligence net without drawing any suspicion. The Ghost Leader system she commanded was revealed to be a prototype AI-assisted tactical planning matrix, a network of repurposed stealthy orbital assets and distributed ground sensors that could process battlefield data, thermal signatures, kinetic energy patterns, radio frequency leaks, faster and more accurately than any human command center, generating predictive movement models with a 90, allowing her to see the future of the firefight before the first bullet was even fired. This explained the seamless, real-time nature of the intelligence that had saved their lives seconds earlier. The way Ghost Leader had been able to pinpoint the jammers and the hostile flanking units with unnatural speed. She wasn't receiving a feed, she was predicting the enemy's next move based on millions of data points, and the simple, unassuming radio on her back, the one Sergeant Miller had joked about, was in fact the only secure, dedicated terminal capable of linking that quantum-level computation back to Hayes's team. The realization created a chilling symmetry. The call sign Cupcake was the perfect decoy for the lethal, devastating efficiency of Ghost Leader, transforming Corporal Vance from a joke into the most valuable and terrifying asset on the entire battlefield, a silent genius who could see everything, and who was now giving Captain Hayes his orders. Back in the target compound, the window for subtlety had vanished. The extraction target, a high-value asset, was secured, but the hostile units, having failed to spring their ambush in the drainage system, were now converging on their position, turning the quiet building into a sudden, deafening close-quarters battle, and Captain Hayes, his condescending attitude annihilated by the terrifying authority of the truth, was now barking orders dictated entirely by the woman he had ridiculed. Rockslide, actual to team, fall back to the eastern stairs. Ghost Leader is reporting a collapse danger on the western approach in T-30 seconds. Hayes screamed over the escalating gunfire, the order making no logical sense to his men, who saw the eastern route as a textbook killing field, but the instant obedience in his voice carried a conviction, born of near-death experience, a trust now absolute and unshakable. Elara, moving methodically behind the fire team, her own weapon holstered, her entire focus poured into the comms panel, transitioned seamlessly from monitoring Ghost Leader's macro strategy to delivering hyper-specific localized instructions to the team, no longer using the authoritative Ghost Leader call sign, but using the deceptively soft Cupcake designation for her direct, subordinate technical communications. Cupcake to Comms 2, initiate frequency overlay Kappa 7 Delta now. I need a clean 5-second burst transmission for data packet retrieval, she directed to her junior technician, Lieutenant Davies, who was also stunned by the sudden operational shift but followed the order instantly, not realizing that Elara was utilizing the chaos of the firefight to execute a rapid-fire localized cyber attack, briefly overriding the enemy's main radio frequency with a powerful targeted counter-signal, not to establish long-term comms, but to download critical intelligence data from a nearby enemy server before the opportunity disappeared. The 5-second window was a razor's edge. The brief burst of white noise from the frequency overlay disoriented the nearest hostile unit, long enough for Sergeant Miller to execute a flanking maneuver, neutralizing the primary threat that was pinning the team down, a smokealized victory that was only possible because Elara had engineered a simultaneous digital and kinetic maneuver, blending cyber warfare with direct action. Hayes, witnessing the immediate tactical benefit of Elara's seemingly illogical order, the western wall exploding in a plume of dust and debris exactly 30 seconds later, confirming Ghost Leader's preemption of a structural collapse, didn't need further proof, and as they cleared the final corridor, driving the remaining hostile forces back with coordinated fire, the team moved, not by sight, but by Elara Vance's voice, executing her commands, trusting that the person they called Cupcake could see a dimension of the battle they were simply too human to perceive. The final moments of the extraction were a chaotic sprint, a controlled stampede, guided by the invisible hand of Ghost Leader. Elara directed the team, step by step through the extraction zone, identifying enemy snipers seconds before they could fire, and guiding the air asset in for a hot landing at a location that seemed dangerously exposed, but was, in fact, the only position shielded from a newly mobilized quick reaction force. The Osprey V-22 was on the ground for less than 20 seconds, allowing the team and the asset to scramble aboard before pulling up hard into the sky, leaving behind a baffled, disorganized enemy force that had been unable to anticipate or counter a single one of their moves, and the relief inside the cramped cabin was immense, immediately giving way to a stunned silence as the Marines removed their helmets, their ears still ringing from the violence of the close-quarters battle they had just survived. Back at the forward operating base hours later, the debriefing room was stark and silent, the unit's faces grimed with dirt and exhaustion, yet the successful completion of the mission, a mission that should have been a catastrophic failure, meant there was an underlying current of shocked triumph, a quiet recognition that they owed their lives to something they couldn't possibly understand. The after-action report, AAR, confirmed the unprecedented nature of the operation, detailing the Ghost Leader protocol as the sole reason for the mission's success, highlighting the unparalleled real-time tactical direction that countered a level of electronic warfare previously thought impossible for a unit of that size to overcome. Captain Hayes and Sergeant Miller, seated at the table, their shoulders slumped, their earlier arrogance replaced by palpable humility, could only offering their own testimony of how a voice from nowhere had saved them all, their earlier mockery of the call sign Cupcake, now feeling like a deep, embarrassing betrayal of professional respect. Just as the debriefing was concluding, the steel door of the room hissed open, and General Peters, the Joint Task Force commander himself, a 3-star Marine general known for his severe, uncompromising leadership, entered, his eyes immediately sweeping the room and settling on the small, quiet figure of Corporal Elara Vance, who immediately stood to attention. The general, bypassing Hayes entirely, walked straight to Elara, looked her in the eye, and confirmed her operational role for all the stunned Marines to hear. Corporal Vance, the Ghost Leader protocol performed beyond all expectations. You executed flawlessly. The acknowledgement was cold, professional and absolute, an official confirmation of her true identity, transforming the dismissed corporal into the silent architect of their survival. The atmosphere on the forward operating base underwent a fundamental, permanent shift after the events of Operation Red Sands. The swaggering confidence of Captain Hayes' team had been thoroughly dismantled and replaced by a silent, almost reverent respect for the woman they had spent the entire pre-deployment snickering at. The memory of their cruel jokes, now a source of deep communal shame. Corporal Vance, though her official rank remained E4, and she continued her daily duties running the mundane administrative comms checks. The public-facing duties of Cupcake was treated with the deference usually reserved for a high-ranking field officer or a legendary sniper, a consequence of the terrifying reality that she was privy to classified intelligence and had the operational authority to override any of their decisions. The call sign Cupcake was never again used in a dismissive context. If they needed to address her directly, they used her formal title, Corporal Vance, and if they needed her to switch to the clandestine frequency to receive or transmit encrypted data, the simple code word Cupcake was used, but it was spoken with a solemnity that acknowledged the Ghost Leader on the other side of the comms line. Elara, for her part, never commented on the change, maintaining her quiet, professional focus, neither holding a grudge nor seeking validation, which only further deepened the respect she earned, quietly continuing her work in the cyber domain, overseeing the Ghost Leader protocol, an invisible protector on the digital frontier. The incident, while never publicly discussed outside the highest levels of command, became an immediate, unspoken lesson within the ranks about the dangers of assumption and the evolving nature of warfare, confirming that true lethality wasn't always measured by the caliber of a weapon or the size of a bicep, but by the computational power of the mind and the absolute precision of information, the most crucial factor in any modern conflict. They all finally understood was not the kinetic energy of a bullet, but the seamless, invisible flow of data, and the quiet Marine they had mocked for her cute call sign was, in fact, the operational master of that digital battlefield, the unassuming necessary genius controlling the pieces from the shadows. The quiet competence of Corporal Vance, the woman who was both Cupcake and Ghost Leader, was the new reality.